Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 785 for September 22nd, 2019. Coming up in a few minutes.
Pot still seems a very interesting whiskey because there's so many permutations within it. They also do gin and vodka as well, so a chance to learn a little bit about other spirits as well.
Graham Coull is going to have a big challenge ahead of him. The Speyside native will have to learn how to spell whiskey with an E when he leaves Glen Moray next month to join Ireland's Dingle Distillery as its new master distiller. We'll talk with Graham about making the big move on WhiskyCast In-Depth. That's just ahead, along with the calendar of events, the What I'm Tasting This Week department, and a whole lot more. All on this edition of WhiskyCast.
When you land on something special, you just know. Redbreast, the quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey, and a proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch Whisky, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. A last-minute deal Tuesday night helped Diageo avoid a strike by the unions that represent about 1,500 workers at its facilities in Scotland. Members of Unite and the GMB were ready to start a series of rolling strikes around Scotland when the company put a new contract offer on the table. Both unions have recommended their members accept the offer, which the BBC reports would be a 2-year deal with a 3% pay raise this year and a pay raise next year in line with the inflation rate. The unions had previously rejected a 1-year deal with an offer of 2.8% pay raises. 6 new members have joined the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame. The induction ceremony was held Thursday in Bardstown as part of this weekend's Kentucky Bourbon Festival. Evan Colesveen of Willett Distillery was also honored with the Parker Beam Lifetime Achievement Award in addition to joining the Hall of Fame. He and his wife Martha Willett Colesveen led the revival of the family's distillery in Bardstown, along with becoming one of the largest independent bottlers of Kentucky bourbon. The class of 2020 also includes Charles W. Medley of Owensboro's legendary Medley family of distillers, longtime Heaven Hill executive Larry Cass, Bourbon Women founder and longtime Brown-Forman executive Peggy Noe Stevens, and Wild Turkey's Katrina Egbert. Her official title is Visitor Center Marketing Coordinator, but she's best known for being Jimmy Russell's right-hand person for more than 30 years. We should note that this is also the first Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame class to have 2 women included. There is also one second-generation inductee this year. Wes Henderson of Angel's Envy joins his father, the late Lincoln Henderson, in the Hall of Fame. Lincoln Henderson was part of the inaugural Hall of Fame class back in 2001. One of the highlights of the Kentucky Bourbon Festival each year is the World Championship Bourbon Barrel Relay. Heaven Hill swept the competition, winning both the men's and women's team relays, while Ashley Cundiff won the women's individual title and Robbie Mattingly won the men's title. This year's competition also included a new entrant from outside of Kentucky. Diageo's Cascade Hollow Distilling Company sent a team up from Tennessee. They finished 5th out of 8 teams in the men's team competition. It is not the first time a team from outside of Kentucky has competed in the relays. MGP of Indiana has competed in the past. In other news, Buffalo Trace unveiled the 2019 edition of its Antique Collection this week, and the flagship of the Antique Collection is a lot different this year. George T. Stagg is the uncut, unfiltered bourbon of the Antique Collection. and previous year's editions have been as high as 70% ABV or higher. But this year's Stag is bottled at 58.45% ABV. Master blender Drew Mayville says there was more evaporation in the barrels picked for this year's Stag.
It's probably the lowest we've ever had for the Stag, and I think they're all fabulous, which I always do. But this time we picked some of the barrels on the lower floors with the higher humidity, so there's more alcohol evaporation versus the water. And so we actually have a very unique product at the lowest proof of George T. Stag. So that's the most interesting. All the other have their unique differences, because every year it's a little bit different. They're very much vintage-like.
This year's Sazerac Rye 18-year-old comes from barrels filled in the spring of 2001, while the uncut and unfiltered Thomas H. Handy Sazerac Rye is a 6-year-old rye whiskey bottled at 62.85% ABV. The uncut and unfiltered William LaRue Weller Wheated Bourbon is 11 years old. It's bottled at 64% ABV, while the Eagle Rare 17-year-old bourbon is bottled at 50.5% ABV for the second straight year. All 5 will hit retailers in the coming weeks. The recommended retail price for each one is $99 a bottle, but you probably won't find them for that price. I'll have tasting notes for them soon at WhiskyCast.com. Meanwhile, Drew Mayville has been busy with another project. He teamed up with the folks at Colombia's Dictador Rum for their latest 2 Masters release. Over the last 4 years, Dictador has been releasing rare vintage rums finished in a variety of casks, including one from Glenfarclas, and for their latest edition, they asked Drew Mayville to work with them using casks from Sazerac's 1792 Barton Distillery in Kentucky.
They sent me all these different rum samples that actually were different ages, treatments, and I actually blended something that I thought was really good that would actually go really well with some of our whiskeys at 1792. So what I did is actually experiment. I took that blend of rum and I actually added different whiskeys in small quantities to simulate that aging process as best as I could. And so what I ended up with is putting that rum, the rum was great to begin with, and then I finished it for 6 months and 8 months for some of them in different styles of whiskey casks. So one was a rye bourbon, one was a wheated bourbon, and one was a straight rye. And lo and behold, what I found is that the tastes were all different and unique. So we're releasing those tonight. And also what I did is, my blending skills and my heritage of blending came into effect. So what I did is I blended 3 of those together to get a 4th expression. And each one of them are totally different and unique, as you can expect with the different styles of whiskeys.
The Dictador rums used in those 4 expressions are all at least 40 years old. Each one will go for a recommended retail price of $2,000 a bottle. We should note that there is a business relationship that led to this project. Sazerac is the U.S. importer for Dictador rum. We mentioned Glenfiddich's new Grand Cru single malt in the news earlier this month. It made its official debut Tuesday night in New York City. Grand Cru is a 23-year-old single malt finished in French oak cuvée casks, and as Glenfiddich's Tracy Franklin explained, it's the first time maltmaster Brian Kinsman has had the chance to work with cuvée casks.
Casks that are used to ferment the wines that go on to become some of the finest sparkling wines. Those casks are actually incredibly active due to the acidity of those wines that are written previously and allow for an incredible amount of oak derivatives like flavor compounds. It's really amazing, and I think that we have a great whiskey from him.
And this is the first time you've done anything with, you can't say the C word here, but with that kind of cask, right?
Not C word. There is no C word. What are you talking about? So, yes, these are from a region in northern France that is known to produce wonderful sparkling wines. Of course, the cask that we're working with, the wines haven't become sparkling wines yet, so it wouldn't technically be the C word. So we want to stay true to what we're actually doing and call them Cuvée casks, which is what they would be.
Grand Cru will be a permanent addition to the Glenfiddich range, albeit in limited quantities. It'll retail for around $300 a bottle. I'll have my tasting notes for it later on. Other new whiskies announced this week. The Glasgow Distillery is releasing its first peated single malt. It's matured in ex-sherry casks and finished in virgin oak. It'll carry a price tag of £49 a bottle. That's around $61 at current exchange rates. And speaking of peat, Ardbeg has confirmed that it'll be releasing a 2019 edition of its Supernova single malt. It's scheduled to go on sale around October 1st. No word on pricing. The Macallan is releasing edition number 5. It's the latest in the Editions series and is matured exclusively in American oak casks. It'll go on sale in early October for around $200 a bottle. And Loch Lomond Distillers is releasing the 3rd edition in the Little Mill Private Cellar series. It's a 29-year-old single malt from the Lowland Distillery and was distilled back in 1990, 4 years before Little Mill closed. Only 600 bottles will be available. There's no word on pricing. The Whiskey Show is this coming weekend in London, and that means the debut of the Whiskey Exchange's annual special releases for the show. This year's The Magic of the Cask series includes a 45-year-old blended Scotch whisky, along with a 23-year-old Imperial single malt, a 22-year-old Ben Nevis, and a 9-year-old Kalila. Prices range from £85 a bottle to £450. And finally, back in February, we introduced you to the Three Drinkers. Colin Hampton White, Helen and Nicklin, and A.D. Smith have just started work on the 2nd season of their Amazon Prime show. Once again, they'll be touring distilleries around Scotland. You can hear my conversation with them in episode 755 of WhiskyCast. It's in the archives at whiskycast.com. Of course, that's where you can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long. The news is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Keeping American whiskey history and tradition alive isn't just a marketing slogan. It's part of Heaven Hill's fabric. When other distillers were getting out of the rye whiskey business, Heaven Hill saved the legendary Rittenhouse rye from becoming a footnote in the history books. And today, it's the rye whiskey of choice, in a cocktail or neat, with a distinct spicy flavor all its own. Find out more at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. The Stockholm Beer and Whiskey Festival gets underway this week in Sweden with the first of 2 weekend sessions, September 26th through the 28th and October 3rd through the 5th. Whiskey and Barrel Night is in Los Angeles on Friday night, the 27th, followed the next day by the LA Scotch Club's 9th annual Peatin' Meetin' celebration. The Whiskey Show is this coming Saturday and Sunday in London. Whiskey Live Paris is the following weekend, October 5th through the 7th. The York Whiskey Festival is on the 5th in York, England. The next Bourbon Salon is on October 8th at Oxmoor Farm in Louisville, and Whiskey Live Beirut is October 10th through the 12th. Right now, we have 162 different events around the world on the searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. If you have a festival, a tasting, or any other whiskey-related event coming up, just use the contact form on the website to let us know about it. We'll be glad to add it to the list.
From deep in the north, far beyond the wall, the howl of the frozen wind brings word of something new. A whiskey from the land of always winter, for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. blended Scotch whisky, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock. Glen Moray unveiled a new 21-year-old port cask-finished Scotch whisky this week. The distillery is located in the heart of Speyside in Elgin, and there's rarely much turnover at Glen Moray. Since 1987, there have only been 2 distillery managers. Ed Dodson ran the place from 1987 until 2005, and Graham Coull has been in charge ever since. That will change a month from now when Graham and his wife Faye leave Elgin and Glen Moray behind to start a new adventure in Ireland, where Graham will become the new manager and master distiller at Dingle Distillery. It's rare that distillery managers move between Scotland and Ireland. Frank McCarty is one of the most recent exceptions. He spent a decade at Bushmills before returning to Springbank. And Graham Coull will not only have to get used to making triple distilled Irish whiskey, but he'll also have to get used to adding the E to whiskey. We talked about the upcoming move this weekend. Why make this move? You'd been at Glen Moray for what seems like forever. I remember talking to you in maybe early 2006, right after you won an award from Jim Murray.
That's right, yeah. I've been with Glen Moray for 14 years now. Prior to that, 11 years with William Grant at Glenfiddich. So there are no great plans to move on, but the opportunity at Dingle just excited me. It just seemed to tick every box in the line. Well, all the things that I like doing in whiskey, it seemed to offer. So it was almost just too good to turn down.
How so? I mean, you had a great situation at Glen Moray where you could have stayed there for the rest of your career if you wanted to, right?
I could have, yeah, and would have enjoyed it and, seen the whiskies develop. But I think just the lure of doing something different and a challenge of working with Dingle, the distillery's an exciting time. It's just coming up for 7 years old, so it's really maturing as a whiskey and moving into a different era for itself. So the chance to kind of put my mark on Dingle whiskey and the distillery was it was almost like doing what I did with Glen Moray and starting again. So it was I think that's what attracted me most.
I often wonder if we're getting past the days where a distillery manager stays at one place for a long period of time. We know that other companies tend to rotate their distillery managers around between facilities, and it seems rarer and rarer for somebody to stay at one place for 14 years as the manager like you did at Glen Moray.
I think so. I don't think there's much of that happens now. It's as you say, that many of the distilleries are owned by bigger groups, so there tends to be several distilleries within the group. So people do tend to move around and not spend too much time at the distillery. My role at Glen Moray was pretty unique in the fact I managed the distillery and managed the whiskey side of things as well. So I really looked after Glen Moray from start to finish. So that was different, and I think that's what I'm going to Dingle to do, on a different scale, and the challenge of learning about Irish whiskey and how it's made is going to be interesting. That'll be my first step as well.
But you'll have an advantage in that they're making primarily single malt, so you already have that going for you. Yes,
they do. They do single malt, and they also do pot still. So pot still seems a very interesting whiskey because there's so many permutations within it. They also do gin and vodka as well, so it's a chance to learn a little bit about other spirits as well.
Now, I have to ask, when you took the trip out to Dingle for the first time, that's a pretty remote place in terms of Irish places. It's right on the southwest coast rather, of Ireland, and it's a long way from anywhere. What did you think when you first came over the mountains and saw it?
Well, I think you're definitely correct. It is. I think it's as far west as you can go. If we keep going, we're swimming towards the States. So it is. It is remote in many ways, but in other ways, it's Dingle itself. Dingle town is a bustling town. It's very huge number of visitors to the town, so it's always got a bit of something going on. So it's quite a lively place. It's probably livelier than Elgin for Glen Moray is. So we quickly warmed to the town and the people as well. They're a very friendly bunch.
I assume you've already been to Dick Mac's for a pint or two?
Well, yes, yeah, we were there. We visited several of the local pubs, and Dick Mac's was the first one we were in. So, yeah, definitely different from anything you would experience on Speyside.
But you're going to miss Speyside, I assume. You've been there your entire life, pretty much, right? Yes,
yeah, definitely. My whole whiskey career has been Speyside, so I'll miss it. I was born and brought up in Speyside as well, so it's going to be, it's a step to move, but on the other hand, if you don't give things a go, you'll never know. So I think life's too short to wonder about what might have been or so. So very happy to make the step and give Irish whiskey a go and see if I can, help Dingle get progress into this next phase of life, really.
How hard was it to convince your wife Faye to go along with this?
I certainly I didn't try and convince her. It was a joint decision. We were both had lots of things to weigh up in our minds, but I think ultimately she probably became more convinced, became convinced quicker than me. She loved the feel of Dingle and just the whole concept. So yeah, in the end, joint decision to up sticks and move across.
Now, when you take over a distillery for the first time as the manager, how important is it to listen to the staff that's already been there and listen to what's been done and learn from what's been done? Or do you come in and try to put your own stamp on things right away?
No, whiskey's a slow process. Whiskey making is anyway. So you need to embrace what's there, understand the distillery, the character, the people. That's exactly what I did at Glen Moray in 2005. So I won't change my approach at all. They've been very successful in what they've done up till now, so I don't foresee making wholesale changes. I just hope that the experience I can bring in working with mature whiskies, I think, is hopefully where I can help them out, because they're, as I say, 7 years old just now, so they're moving into an exciting time in terms of mature and aged whiskies.
And that's where you bring your blending experience to the forefront, right?
Yeah, I think it's whiskey stocks management. It's getting the managing the stocks so you've got your expressions, a good range of expressions that are consistent and they're sustainable, but also on the other hand experimenting as well and trying to do different things to keep people interested.
How will you define success 10, 15 years from now at Dingle?
I think for me, that I'd like to see or continue to see Dingle Distillery being a part of the community, because it's very important. It is in a remote place, so it needs to be part of the town. And on the other hand, on a other scale, I'd like to see Dingle globally known and globally respected as one of the best Irish whiskies out there. So there's two sides, local and global as well.
So what one expression of Glen Moray are you going to take with you to Dingle?
I've literally got boxes of Glen Moray I'll be taking with me physically, so so I will be able to compare and contrast. I don't know. It's too early to say. You know, there is some wonderful Dingle whiskey already maturing in some wonderful casks. So I'd like to, understand what's there, and then just have a little bit of a play around and see what works and what doesn't work. They haven't introduced any peated expressions at all, so might be one thing I'd like to try.
What is the one thing you're proudest of in your tenure at Glen Moray?
That's a tough question. I think probably for me, just that Glen Moray is a respected single malt, within the whiskey community, and there's a following for Glen Moray. There's a fan base which is loyal, and they've been very supportive of what I've done. So I think it's just that Glen Moray is has been welcomed, and has a loyal base out there that sell Glen Moray for us as well, for the distillery, their ambassadors. So it's always lovely to see people praise the whiskey and enjoy it.
Graham Coull's final day at Glen Moray is October 21st. His successor has not yet been named. La Martiniquais, which owns Glen Moray, is still looking at candidates for the job, and we'll let you know when they make a decision. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret, hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies. Comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. Let's start off with Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Famer Jim Rutledge's hand-selected Cream of Kentucky Bourbon. It's 11.5 years old and bottled at 51% ABV. It comes from an undisclosed distillery, and the nose is woody and aromatic with a nice smell of well-worn oak furniture, hints of tobacco and leather, mixed spices, and molasses. The taste is peppery and powerful, with a hint of cinnamon, complemented by brown sugar, pipe tobacco, honey, and a touch of spearmint. The finish is long, with gently fading spices and touches of honey and spearmint. It's excellent, but you'd expect nothing less from Jim Rutledge. I'm scoring his Cream of Kentucky 11.5-year-old bourbon a 94. Let's head south to Arkansas and the recent 9th anniversary single malt release from Rocktown Distillery in Little Rock. Founder Phil Brandon decided to finish this year's anniversary edition in a cognac cask. He bottled it at 47% ABV, and the nose is malty with a touch of berry cobbler, honey, vanilla, and a nice oakiness. The taste has a good balance of fruitiness and subtle spices, with fresh berries, red apples, allspice, ginger, barley sugar, and just a hint of honey. The finish is long and vibrant with a nice hint of maltiness, subtle spices, and lots of fruity notes. I've tasted a lot of Rocktown whiskeys over the years, and this is one of the best yet. I'm scoring Rocktown's 9th anniversary Arkansas single malt a 92. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. Rye whiskey was distilled by America's original risk-takers and history makers. Those first barrels of whiskey were bold, flavorful, and full of passion. Sagamore Spirit proudly picked up the torch with their spring-fed Maryland-style rye whiskey, celebrating the grit and glory of those patriotic ancestors who sipped their way into American history. Visit SagamoreSpirit.com to explore their award-winning spirit. Seattle's Westland Distillery has released its annual Garyana single malt whiskey. This year's edition is labeled 4.1, and it's a blend of Westland's malts matured in both Oregon Gary Oak casks and ex-sherry casks, and it's bottled at 50% ABV. The nose is nicely balanced with notes of figs and other tree fruits, honey and hints of sandalwood and pine needles. The taste has wood, spices, and fruits in abundance, with figs, plums, grilled peaches, white pepper, allspice, sandalwood, and even a hint of mint in the background. The finish has long-lasting spices with a good underlying sweetness and fruity notes. I'm scoring Westland's Garyana 4.1 American Single Malt a 92. And we'll wrap up with one of the whiskeys I mentioned during the news. Glenfiddich's Grand Cru is 23 years old and finished in French oak cuvée casks. It's bottled at 40% ABV. The nose has a nice fruitiness with a hint of green grapes, along with dried flowers, malted barley, and vanilla. The taste is fruity and almost effervescent with tropical fruits, green grapes, dried flowers, honey, and just a hint of maltiness. The finish is long, bubbly, and vibrant with tropical fruits and green grapes. It's a nice change of pace, and I'm scoring the Glenfiddich Grand Cru a 93. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 2,600 different whiskeys from all over the world. You can bookmark it on your smartphone to use whenever you're picking out a dram, and you can check it out right now at whiskeycast.com.
The search never ends, but it's nice when you can come in for a landing, pause and explore the silky smoothness of single pot still Irish whiskey, matured in the finest bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks. Land on Redbreast, then be sure to pass it on. Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
Let's open up the inbox now for your voice, presented by Lot 40. Greg Butler, at ButlerB on Twitter, shared some photos with us this week that led to a bit of a discussion. Here's his original tweet. A very old bottle of James Beam. A neighbor gave this to my dad 30 years ago. Sounds like there has been some evaporation. And the photos Greg sent were of an old Jim Beam ceramic decanter from the Preakness Stakes horse race in 1970. So I tweeted this to Greg. I'd bet there's also been some oxidation in that whiskey too, and would be really hesitant to drink it. That's when Donald Hanna slid into the conversation with this tweet. Why? Other than changing the taste, what problems could result? I have a lot of older spirits, both opened and not. What concerns should I have? Well, in this case, my concerns were more with the decanter than with the general age of that whiskey. We've talked about this before, but those decanters were never known for having a good seal on the top, and that allows air to get inside and not only cause the evaporation that Greg mentioned, but also oxidize the whiskey inside. The bigger issue, though, is that not just Jim Beams, but decanters of all kinds made back then were produced with ceramic glazing that contains lead. And after almost 50 years, it's very likely that some of that lead has leached into the whiskey. It may not be enough to cause a health problem, but it's also not worth taking a chance. Now, there is usually nothing wrong with older spirits that are in regular glass bottles, as long as the closures have remained stable over the years. Ashley Penny of Ireland has been working his way through all of our past episodes over the course of the last few months, but he took a break this weekend to post a photo on our Facebook page. Just seen this in my local bar. I don't think I've heard of it. Have you or anyone tried it? Well, the photo is of a bottle of Benchmark Old No. 8 brand bourbon. And, yeah, I've heard of it. It's distilled at Buffalo Trace, and the 8 is not an age statement, just a brand thing, sort of like the Old No. 7 on Jack Daniel's bottles isn't an age statement. I've seen Benchmark Old Number 8 in a number of European cities, and it's one of the brands that Sazerac likes to emphasize in export markets. It can be found in the U.S., but here it would be considered a value bourbon. I mentioned on social media this week that my family is trying to get me to eat healthier, and I joked that it's a good thing that whiskey is plant-based. Well, that got a lot of laughs, but it also got this comment from Greg David. I may need to get this on a t-shirt. Greg, stay tuned. We're working on that very idea right now. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Let's wrap things up now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and all that other stuff that combine to make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Had the chance to answer an interesting question on Quora.com, and I thought I'd share it with you. Does Scotch actually get better with barrel aging? And if so, is there an age at which the whiskey no longer significantly improves, and so is no longer worth the increase in price? Well, if you've ever had the chance to taste new make spirit straight from the still, the answer to the first part of that question is pretty easy. Yep, sure does. Barrel aging not only gives Scotch and other whiskeys their color, but the interaction between wood and spirit over time helps accentuate chemical compounds that give whiskeys their unique flavors and aromas. There is an age where the whiskey no longer, quote, significantly improves, but that's different for pretty much every single cask, and it depends on how many times that cask has been used previously. Casks that have been used 2 or 3 times to mature whiskey have had a lot of their influence reduced. You might think of a tea bag after several cups. And those casks will usually need a much longer period of time for the whiskey inside to mature. Casks that are brand new for Scotch whiskey, like a first fill ex-bourbon barrel, will be much more active chemically and mature their whiskey much faster. In many cases, there's a sweet spot between 15 to 18 years where a whiskey is most likely to reach its absolute peak, and that's where whiskey makers will make a decision on whether to bottle it, re-rack it into a less active cask and let it sit for a few years, or keep letting it sit if it's not quite ready yet. As for whether or not that older whiskey is no longer worth the increase in price, that is a question that only you can answer for yourself. I've tasted Scotch whiskies as old as 75 years in the cask that were amazing, and if I'd had the money, I gladly would have paid the asking price for a bottle. You might not be willing to pay that price, but that's what makes each of us unique. If you have something you'd like us to look at on Behind the Label, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you can find links for our WhiskyCast HD videos and the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast, along with the latest whiskey news, tasting notes, the whiskey photo of the week, and a complete archive of all of our past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. Now, if you'd like to make sure that you never miss a single episode of WhiskyCast, all you have to do is click on the subscribe button in your favorite podcast app, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or another app. Doesn't cost anything, but you will get every episode as soon as it drops. You can also listen to WhiskyCast on your home smart speaker or Spotify, too. We'd love to hear from you. You can always reach us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch Whisky, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
When you land on something special, you just know. Redbreast, the quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey, and a proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2019, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.